Good evening, everyone. I'm with myself, Adrian Finnan, and joined once again by Noel O'Connor this evening as we digest all things treaty and Ireland going into what is a crucial week across the board, particularly at international level. Noel, it's fair to say, but we'll start with local level. Treaty United, League of Ireland, got a 1-1 draw against Longford at the weekend. Noel started off by going 1 goal down from a fairly soft set piece with Sam Verdon on the end of it. It was the first goal Longford scored against Treaty this season. Responded quite well to that, I must say. It grew into the game as it went on. Got their equaliser through a brilliantly taken end the Kern goal. And on the face of it, Noel, it must be said that it's a good result.
Oh, definitely a good result. I think both teams will be happy. I think particularly Tommy will be happy with it. You're right about the concession. The goal, it was straight out of the Treaty playbook, particularly from last year, an overhit corner to the back post, headed across to the front post again, if you like, and a good finish from Sam Verdon. But certainly Treaty will be disappointed. It's not something you see them do often. They've been very, very good defending set plays, particularly this year. But a brilliant goal then from Enda Kern. He's really, at the top of his game. I think he's at the peak of his powers at the moment. The confidence is flowing, and he's very happy the way he held off the defender, and a brilliant technical finish. Great pace on it, ball speed, an excellent goal. And while I thought Longford played well in the first half and a lot of football, I thought the game got a bit scrappy in the second half. And in terms of chances, I think Treaty would have edged it in chances, but certainly they'll be happy to keep that unbeaten run going. I think both teams will be happy. It's another point towards getting to the playoffs or consolidating your place in the playoffs, I think, there. And they know that they'll live to fight another day, and there might be bigger battles on the horizon between them in the next 4 weeks maybe. So neither team, if you like, wanted to lose face or concede any psychological ground in that battle.
Yeah, both sides have been extremely close, Noel, throughout the year. You've obviously had 3 draws, 2-0 all draws and one all draw at the weekend, obviously. But then Treaty picked up a really good win in the home game at the Marks Field, which is the only difference between the teams all season in terms of points. They've taken points off each other or shared these points, otherwise. It's fair to say that it's always tight when Tommy Barrett and Gary Cronin come up against each other in terms of results. I mean, in their overall record, which starts with the last game of 2018 between Bray and Limerick FC, who obviously neither are in charge of anymore. It's been Tommy Barrett just shading it with 4 wins, Gary Cronin with 3 and 4 draws, so it's extremely close.
Yeah, very close. And I think the way, I'd certainly go back to Bray last year and Longford this year. I think it's a kind of a style of play that suits Treaty to play against, because they like to sit in. It's a possession-based game and a lot of sideways passes and going backwards more than forwards. And I think that kind of suits Treaty, who like to be organised. It gives them a chance to get back into their defensive shape. And it is no surprise, obviously, except for that game in the Marcus Field, that the matches between them have been really, really tight.
Yeah, definitely. There was obviously positives to it. Getting the point, getting closer, edging yourself closer to getting the playoffs. We mentioned obviously the form of Enda Kern, and he backed that up again. On top of that as well, Noel, there was a few changes to the team. Sean Gearns, Dean George not in the team. Obviously, Jack Lynch came back in as well off the substitutes bench. But you had starts for Joel Costrain, Conor Melody and Matt Keane, which has been a rarity in the last maybe 2 months of the season. So Tommy will be, happy to get decent minutes into those type of players as well, who, could very well become important if there's a lengthy playoff campaign as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've the FAI Cup final thrown in there as well. And in fairness to Conor Melody, he's been a kind of there. I said semi-final.
I thought I said the final there.
No, that's just you jumping ahead of it again. But no, a very important semi-final coming up. I think in fairness to Conor Melody, he's a regular sub. He's come on, I think, in a lot of games. I'm a bit surprised at how Matt Keane has kind of, just been only a bit part player compared to how important he was, particularly last season at the start of this season. And Joel Costrain, I think it's important to give him a bit of game time, because certainly if you're chasing a game or you're looking for a goal, he's probably a guy that you'd look at, for his ability to create something out of nothing.
Yeah, and Matt Keane, Noel, we're used to seeing him playing on either wing, mostly on the right side, to be fair. He played in midfield. Now, I would suggest it was out of necessity, because, as I mentioned, you had Mark Walsh had to go back in next to Callum McNamara into centre back because of the absence of Sean Gearns. Jack Lynch was still obviously not available to start the game. So, I mean, if you're Matt Keane, you're probably thinking, I'm not any closer to getting back into the plans if I'm going to be played in centre midfield, where he's definitely down the pecking order.
Yeah, I think so, and I can see the logic of it too, playing him in there, because certainly defensively, I've always found him, more than adequate, even in the wide areas. I always thought that, he'd make you very solid, particularly if your fullback was under pressure. And, if you are taking Mark Walsh out of the midfield, well, then a defensive type player is certainly a good option to put in there, particularly when you're away from home. And that was probably the reason why. And in fairness to Matt Keane, he seems to be a very professional guy in terms of his attitude. And maybe they'll need him again in there. And, the fact that he had that spin out in Longford, he'll certainly have his name back in the manager's head for the next few games. Yeah,
and I know that I mentioned obviously as well, Joel Castrain and Conor Melody got decent run-outs on either wing, because you had Willie Armstrong on the bench who did come on. Dean George wasn't in the matchday squad. So, but unfortunately, I suppose, Noel, when these guys get their chance like that, if they're not maybe with the form that Willie Armstrong, Dean George are in, if they're not assisting or scoring goals or maybe even peppering the opposition goal with shots, the chances are they're going to return to a place in the bench and will find it very hard to break through.
Yeah, and that's the reality of the situation. And, we've spoken about it, particularly Willie Armstrong, who has really taken his chance, when he's got his start. He's been consistently playing well and creating goals, and scoring the odd goal as well. And that's the reality of the league they're in. Those guys have the jersey now. It's the business end of the season. If a team is playing particularly well and the results are good, well, then any manager is reluctant to change for the sake of change. But as you said, it was important to get those guys on the pitch, because there will be, in the playoffs, a couple of days break. There'll probably be a suspension in there maybe, or obviously we don't want an injury, but it's likely there will be someone injured. And particularly in those areas, the wide areas, is where you do make most of your changes. I think every manager, the first change is a wide player or a striker, whereas, you don't see too many centre halves or centre midfielders being substituted. So important to give those guys a bit of game time and keep everyone fresh and ready for action.
Yeah, anything can happen in football, Noel. So not counting the chickens overall. I know that Treaty have a 10-point lead on Wexford, but all of a sudden, if you don't, get a decent result against Galway and Wexford win, you're kind of saying, oh, will there be a chance like that we could be caught, especially if playing Wexford? But the likelihood is Treaty are going to be in the playoffs. And do you think that their performances as of late, we'll say as of late being the last 2 months, they got a 0-0 draw against Galway in Galway. They obviously got a win and a draw against Longford. They ran Waterford quite close. Do you think that the performances against the likes of those teams who are likely to be paired against them in the playoffs will give Treaty a lot of confidence?
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit more like last year, the last 6 or 8 weeks, where the results were quite good against those teams, and they were tipping along in second and third place. And, we hadn't seen that maybe until the last 6 or 8 weeks. But of late, I think, and we've repeated the couple of changes at the back, the change of centre half and at right back, the form, the gathering momentum of the form of Enda Kern, Dean George's consistency, and just finding that right balance. And they've got into a bit of a groove. They certainly won't fear anyone in that playoff. As you said, the results have been very close, and they're certainly in a good place at the moment.
Yeah, they certainly are. And I just want to give a bit of credit actually as well, Noel, to two players who, I suppose had a tough part during the season when Treaty were, in relatively poor form themselves by all accounts, was Lee Devitt and Stephen Christopher, because Stephen Christopher has been right in terms of assists. He assisted Enda Kern for that goal, even though I know it was a very good individual turn from Kern. It was a deep enough pass. He's been rightly involved and seen a lot of improvement from him in the last 4 weeks, particularly with the change, Noel, from him being out wide to maybe in that kind of number 10 or the creative role. Maybe it's just he's more involved. And Lee Devitt has seemed to, in my opinion, improved a lot. I know a lot of people will tell me that Lee Devitt has played like that all season. That's fair enough. But I do feel like he's having more of an impact in recent weeks. Maybe that's just because they're winning and we're all feeling good.
Yeah, and I think possibly the combination in there, and that's often important. I often talk about that combination at the back as well, where the sum is greater than the parts. But certainly, with Mark Walsh sitting and holding that midfield, I think it's given Lee Devitt a bit of freedom. He does look a bit eye catching when he's breaking forward. He does that work around the pitch. He's a good runner. He's got himself into decent scoring positions. And I thought when he was in there with Joe Collins, there was definitely a kind of a deficit there. I didn't really know who was doing what or was anyone doing anything, and I think nobody ended up doing anything. But certainly with that structure of a good, solid defensive midfielder in there, I think it's given him a little bit of freedom, and he seems to be playing with probably a bit more relaxed in his own attitude, and certainly a bit of freedom to get around the pitch. But certainly he's very good at.
Definitely, and we'll turn our attention now, Noel, to Friday night's game against Galway United. We know the reason Galway will be desperate to win, just to continue to stop or keep Cork at bay from winning the league like they did in their last outing, in fairness, when it looked all set for Cork City to win the league, 1-0 up, and then a late show from Galway. And John Caulfield was thanking his lucky stars, I'd say, that Cork didn't win the league in Galway. That really would have been a sore one for him. But I suppose it won't be said by treaty in the media and all, but I do get the impression that Tommy Barrett, all his coaching staff, and a good chunk of the players that were there last year will really, really want to beat Galway, because they haven't beaten this Galway yet in the time the club, the team, treaty, haven't beaten Galway in a competitive fixture yet. And there's been a lot of tight games and a lot of last minute concessions, so I do think that they'll really want this one.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think that they're in the form as well, that they should be confident about it, that it's kind of more of a reality, if you like. Tommy talks about Galway being full-time, but like, I would say, looking at Treaty now, they're certainly as fit a group as they have been in the last 2 years. They have a striker that's banging form, something that Galway don't have. And they're certainly solid at the back, and they're very cohesive. And, when you've Enda Curran in the team in the form he's in, shouldn't really fear anyone, particularly if you set up the way Treaty do, to make sure that you don't concede, or, you certainly don't concede anything soft. And I think Galway's problems all year has been scoring goals. They've struggled a bit up there. They've depended on Stephen Walsh, who's just, a left full come striker. They didn't really solve it in the window, and it's probably something that's hanging over them. And there's no reason why Treaty can't think that they can beat Galway, and it's going to be a difficult game for Galway as well. They're hanging just by their fingernails on Cork at the moment. I know John will be desperately determined to stop Cork winning the league, not only this week, but probably next week as well. But sometimes when you're kind of in that kind of a focus, it's kind of tightens up a team. And I just felt that Galway were getting really tightened up in the last few weeks. I know that they had a great win against Cork after being a goal down, which was really impressive. But I think they're just running out of time, and they'll certainly find it difficult to get the 3 points against Treaty this weekend.
Yeah, I know that Kieran Burke on Between the Stripes, who runs a very good podcast, to be fair, on the league on a weekly basis, Noel. I suppose he was one of a few people that found it hard to believe that Galway weren't able to fire this year, because Wilson Mawero has always shown promise, hasn't he? You've also got Rob Manley now signed in July, who obviously has shown in the past that he can score at this level with Longford and Kevin Teely, but hasn't really been in the side a lot. Jordan Adiemo was there at the start of the year, and he was someone that Galway fans were pinning hopes on, and he was turfed out because he wasn't in good form, but then managed to score 5 goals in 5 games for Longford. So, I mean, in one way, it's a mystery, really, that Stephen Walsh has been so heavily relied upon, I suppose. But then again, when you actually look at maybe the style of play for John as well, it's not that much of a mystery that Walsh has been so pivotal.
Yeah, look, he's a big guy, and puts it in the box, and they do like to get the ball down and put it in the box, and play a very direct style. You just would have thought that they might have looked for a plan B at times. We haven't seen a whole lot of that, but at the end of the day, whether they stop Cork winning the league and go up directly, or if they go up through the playoffs, that's really all that counts, and they'll certainly be fighting to their last breath. And I suppose that's what what's made them so difficult that, you know, if you look over the season, a lot of goals coming in the 94th, the 95th, the 96th minute, whether to win a game or to draw a game, and that's something that Treaty certainly have to be wary of on Friday.
I know you talked about it earlier when you were mentioning between Treaty and Longford. Maybe either of them won't want to be shown too much of a hand. That's equally the same, because if you look at the way the playoffs are set up, Noel, these two teams absolutely, like, look, Galway have no choice but to go for it, I suppose, really, and try and win the game as well. But both sides, I suppose, will possibly be renewing rivalries in a very short space of time over two legs.
Yeah, I think that's highly likely, but I don't think that'll come into the thinking of Galway United on Friday.
No.
Certainly still mathematically in a chance of winning the league, and look, they're not thinking about the playoffs now. They're in them anyway, you know, regardless of what happens, and they'll just have a one-track mind on Friday night, and that'll be to get the 3 points just to keep the title race going for at least another week.
And just on a final note with Galway, Noel, do you believe that, you know, obviously we believe it's highly likely with Galway being in the playoffs, but they're not thinking about it right now, but do you believe that maybe like with the ultra pressure that John Caulfield will be under in the playoffs, that, you know, nothing but promotion will do, even though he has another year in the contract after this season?
Yeah, look, I don't know really what's going on internally in Galway, but you know they certainly have high hopes. I think when John came in first, which was kind of halfway through the season before last, you know, and they were maybe 7th or 8th, and you know he really got him within a whisker of going up, and I suppose that kind of built the expectation that, look, if he can do that in a half a season, we're kind of guaranteed to go up last year. And I felt that the feeling was that they would go up last year, and it's just a bit more pressure and a bit more pressure. So hard to judge what will happen. But we probably better wait and see how things go in the playoffs first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we were due to talk about Cork City, but we might leave that for another week, because there's plenty to discuss on the Irish front, Noel, as well, on the international front. It was a disappointing result, Noel. Maybe not. It certainly wasn't a disappointing performance for at least 60 minutes of it anyway. But disappointing result on Saturday, losing 2-1 to Scotland, especially in the fashion that Ireland lost, because it kind of had a draw written all over it, didn't it? Really, until Alan Brown gave away that penalty. I know Stephen was saying he was pushed, but if he was pushed by anyone, he was pushed by John Egan behind him, the other Irish defender. But you know, I suppose it's come down now, Noel, to, you know, it's always been the case, but there's like a two sides here, you know, of are you, you know, supporting Stephen Kenny, or are you anti Stephen Kenny? Because people are starting to question the likes of Damien Delaney, starting to question, you know, when do we actually start looking for results in this process? You know, because we go into a match, like for instance, tomorrow night is huge, and you know the way Ireland is, Noel, in the Aviva Stadium, after a result where it's been, you know, maybe a disappointing end to it, and there's a bit of pressure in the game. If Ireland don't score early tomorrow night, it could be a very nervy place in the Aviva Stadium against the Armenia, and you know, we have to avoid relegation.
I've just seen the Armenia have conceded 14 goals and scored 1. And look, I think it is a must win, and I think Ireland will win. I think they certainly played well. I think the conundrum from Ireland always is, and look, I thought Scotland were decent as well, and wasn't that Ireland, you know, played particularly badly at any stage, but when you play a team, you know, each team are going to get spells, you know, where they get a bit of momentum, and they're on the front foot for a few minutes. But I do feel that defensively there is individual mistakes a lot, and I'm just wondering, is it to do with the system? I know the system is really good when we have possession, but you know, you look at the basics, what a fullback has to do, stop crosses, and I think we haven't been good at doing that in a lot of games, and you can always pick it out. John Egan, I'm a great fan of his, yet you know, he lost his man from inside in the box, just simple really mistakes, couple of chances to score. And the worry for me was, you're not going to play well in every game, no matter who you are. I mean, we sit here and talk about Treaty maybe against Cove 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we thought they were very poor, but they eked out a win. Against UCD, they were fantastic. The worry for me is that Ireland were really good on Saturday night, yet came away with nothing, because there are going to be days when they're not really good, and it's those days that you really have to pick up either a draw or win. And I just haven't seen that in that team. That I think they were talking tonight about something being missing, and maybe it is experience, but I think there's enough of experience in that team that they need to realise that whether you're playing well or playing poorly, you just got to get the result. You got to find a way to get a draw or find a way to get a win, and I think that's just lacking, and that certainly needs to change quickly.
And notoriously, Noel, particularly under Stephen Kenny's reign, there's been after a very good performance or a promising performance. Now we probably haven't got the results because we've only had 3 wins and 20 competitive internationals, but there's always been a following of a very poor performance. You look at the likes of Luxembourg at home, and and that's the worry going into tomorrow night, and that'll surely be on the minds of players, won't it? Because Armenia are going to be totally different to Scotland. They're not going to come out and attack Ireland, so it'll be a totally different game, and the whole impetus will be on Ireland to come out and get that goal.
Absolutely, and you won't get those chances to counter-attack against Armenia, I think. So it is really important that they certainly play in the front foot and play quickly. And sometimes you probably need to be direct, and they probably need to go a little bit more direct, I think, tomorrow night. And certainly, the old cliche, just put them under pressure and get the crowd up. And look, the early goal is really going to be very, very important. I could see Callum Robinson maybe starting tomorrow night with his goal record, although not recently, but certainly in the last 12 or 15 months, his goal record has been pretty good. But I hate saying it, but it certainly is a game that Ireland need to win and need to win well.
Yeah, and outside of that change, Noel, where you may think Callum Robinson may come in, can you see any other changes? Like, for instance, there seems to be a clamour in the media maybe for Matt Doherty to drop out and play Alan Brown in that position. I suppose that all comes from the frustration of his lack of effort to stop that cross, I think, really on Saturday night.
Yeah, it's just one thing. And it was disappointing, particularly with his new manager in Spurs. I think he'd be too enamoured by his inability to stop the cross. So, look, there might be a few changes. I'm wondering, is Seamus Coleman going to come in? He said that he's not making too many changes. I think he'll make a couple of changes up top for sure, or maybe just flip it and bring on those guys maybe in the last half an hour, and start possibly Robinson and up our own Ogbene tomorrow night, and maybe bring Troy Parrott on, later on in the game. But there's going to be a change in the middle of the park anyway. I'm not so sure about Alan Brown as a wing back. Maybe Seamus Coleman there. Possibly Robbie Brady to start on the far side. I thought James McLean was pretty quiet, which wouldn't be his normal. But look, probably need to make a few changes, and we can always bring people on. But regardless of who's playing, they certainly need a big start.
Yeah, I was just when you termed Ogbene as our own, I was thinking to myself, we desperately need the likes of Dara Costello to get into the Irish setup to actually claim one of our own. It's been so long, as we've discussed on numerous occasions. But on another big evening, Noel, final note for ourselves as well, it's a big evening tomorrow night for not just the senior team, but the under-21s. It's absolutely huge. Second leg of that playoff, the Euro playoff. I mean, it's amazing, really, that we've never got to a tournament at that level. Well, it's not really when you think about it, because anyone that's good enough in Ireland from 18, 19 generally gets put straight into the senior side, really. But, there was part of me, Noel, that thought last week was a missed opportunity for the under-21s at home. They drew on all, obviously. But then you see the Israelis have called in maybe 4 or 5 players from their senior squad that will be available to play for them tomorrow night as well, obviously at home. So it's going to be a very difficult night. Obviously, we hope they can manage it. But there was part of me thinking you kind of needed a lead going over there.
Possibly, and the other side of it is that this team, in fairness, have got a couple of great results away from home. They're going to be together now for 2 or 3 days, and they've nothing to lose. And I would give them a real chance, to be fair to them.
I suppose the way goals not counting is a big thing too, Noel, actually.
Yeah. That it's certainly it's a cup final now. It's kind of a 90-minute cup final, obviously, if it isn't a draw. But look, I don't think. Look, obviously, it would have been better if they won, but then they might be just trying to hang on to that lead, on tomorrow night, whereas it's a kind of a cup final now. And look, you certainly give them a real chance.